minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you all for being here. It's an important topic, and I think a lot of potential for bipartisan agreement and policymaking. I want to try and understand the mandatory minimum policy by the administration and understand what the intent is and maybe get at what some of the repercussions are. So the administration, Mr. Chester, this is for you. The administration supports mandatory minimums for cases where death or serious bodily injury can be directly linked to the fentanyl analog that was trafficked. I understand where we're going with this. You don't want to put people in jail just because they're a drug addict, but you do want to put the drug dealers in jail. Now, the problem is, why support this standard rather than a standard that would get at the serious trafficking cases? Because these are notoriously hard to prove for prosecutors, to prove that this overdose was directly linked via intent and the substance to this dealer. They're having a very hard time prosecuting that.
Thank you for your question, Congressman. And I'll give you the policy aspect of it, but I'd like to defer to the Department of Justice. And I know that they've submitted a statement for the record on this particular, on kind of the arcana of it as well. But I will tell you, you asked the question where we were coming from on this, and so I want to make sure that we're clear. I would make a different distinction than the one that you made between the trafficker and actually the user, and make a distinction actually upon the substance itself. And so you mentioned fentanyl analogs. Those fentanyl analogs that have been identified and have been tested, those are Schedule 1. They've been placed in the scheduling regime. That's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is we have gathered up an entire class of substances, uncreated, that within that class of substance, there may be substances that either have medical merit or are not the least bit harmful. They're not any more harmful than water. So the question is, what do you do in those particular cases where an individual has been convicted of a substance that is only within Schedule 1 by virtue of its class scheduling? That's why that particular guardrail was put in.
Okay, and maybe if DOJ was here, we'd ask them what we could do to make it easier to prosecute drug dealers with bad intent that are dealing fentanyl that's killing people. I mean, I'm just going to simplify what we're trying to get at, and this seems to get in the way of it. And on a separate note, the administration talks about harm reduction as a method to deal with this crisis. San Francisco, Philadelphia, New York City, they're promoting harm reduction programs. Have they had great success in mitigating opioid abuse? More so than cities that have just cracked down harder on illegal drug use. And what does the literature say on safe injection sites? Are these workable solutions or not?
I can get you an exact answer on kind of the science behind safe injection sites, and in fact, I could turn it over to Dr. Volkov. I will tell you in broader terms, when it comes to harm reduction, it's saving people's lives and preventing them from overdosing to drugs. That's kind of one element. The second element of that is it is the first step on the road, hopefully, to treatment leading to long-term recovery. That is ultimately the goal. But when it comes to the science behind safe injection sites, Dr. Volkov, if you'd like to add something.
Quickly, please, because I got another thing I want to hit.
Yeah, we have done research in other countries, but not in the United States. And from that research, it has actually mitigated some of the adverse effects of drug use, including HIV, hepatitis C, and overdoses. But we need to test this in our country.
I understand. And thank you for being here. Thank you for your answers. I do want to point out something. When it comes to the opioid crisis and 100,000 deaths in the past year, we can talk about mandatory minimums. We can talk about harm reduction. And these things are very important to talk about. But we wouldn't have to be talking about those things if there was no fentanyl in the system in the first place. Now, we're lucky in a sense because we know where it's coming from, right? Chinese supplies the chemicals, and the Mexican drug cartels are pushing it across our southern border. I say we're lucky to know that because it allows us to focus on something. It allows us to focus on the source of the problem, which is an open southern border, where drug cartels are simultaneously shoving hundreds of people at a time across the border to tie up Border Patrol. Meanwhile, Border Patrol is not actually patrolling the border, and the drug cartels can put their drugs through the gaps in our border. And then they come here, and we seize hundreds and hundreds of pounds of fentanyl, which can kill tens of millions of Americans. We seize that on a regular basis. And I'd like to submit for the record from Operation Lone Star these statistics from Texas specifically. And I yield back.